This question to do with why we have a self, why we have this reflective entity that we can point to and say, that's me. That seems like a pretty important question. Why do we have this thing called a self? And for me at least, that question, like all of those kind of questions actually, resolves to the same basic answer, which is to do with our evolutionary history. We have a self for the same reason we have an appendix, or for the same reason we have an eyeball, or for the same reason we have fingernails. At some point in our evolutionary history, it was adaptively advantageous to have this sense of a self. Not necessarily so we could point to it and say that it was me, but so it would serve some kind of function. And I'm assuming that the evolutionary history that refers to isn't simply the physical environment. There's plenty of animals out there in the physical environment who are coping perfectly well without this sense of self, and I'm not convinced that it would differentiate enough from them. I'm not sure what physical niche it would serve to have that sense. Certainly not in the complex way that we have. I mean, obviously you need some basic sense of self-protection, but that's not the same thing. It seems to me that it would evolve best in the complex social environments, particularly the social environments that emerge once we're capable of symbolic transactions and symbolic representations. In other words, the beginning of language. So it seems to me that the self, this notion of a self, of a reflective self, would probably emerge sometime after we began to gather into social groups, form complex relationships and symbolize those relationships and carry out transactions within those relationships using symbolic forms like language. And the complexity of the self would probably echo and mirror the complexity of the language that we use. Something like simple warning cries, which many of our cousins in the animal kingdom can do, probably isn't sufficient to require this this entity we think of as I or me, or which features in language as I or me, wouldn't require those. It would only be, as I say, when more complex grammatical and syntactical structures are formed within language, and not just spoken language, but other kinds of languages, that I'm guessing something like a self would need to, or would serve some survival function. Because in a sense you're not just preserving your physical body, you're also preserving your symbolic existence in language. I think when we're talking, we like to be represented in language, we like to be represented in the language of other people, we like to be discussed. If we think that we're off the agenda in terms of people's list of concerns, then we're under threat in some way, and that's quite literally the case, I guess. Certainly the history of the various emancipations is a history of people having themselves put on the linguistic agenda, the representational and symbolic agenda of governance and societies. So I think there is absolutely, within a social situation, an adaptive advantage to making sure that that yourself is present, not only in an embodied fashion, but in a symbolic fashion. So it probably mirrors and emerges out of and contributes to the linguistic evolution of a species. It wasn't really what I was going to talk about actually, but since I've got that far, I think I'll leave it there.